On November 21st, 1992, Tom Monfils disappeared after a workplace dispute. A day later, his body was found in a pulp vat with a 50-pound weight wrapped around his neck. Over 30 years later, exactly who killed Monfils remains a mystery. Welcome to the Monfils 6 podcast. My name is Damon Schneider.
My name's Mike Putchell.
Tonight's episode is entitled Dirty Detail Sheets. So mill worker Steve Stein and the bait and switch. So Winkler interviewed mill worker Steve Stein on January 25th, 1994. This was also in the documentary. Winkler showed up at Stein's house saying that he had to sign a form that he failed to sign the previous day while being interviewed at the police station. Stein insisted 3 times he had signed it, but Winkler said, "No, you didn't. I'm in a hurry. Just sign it." Just as Stein had the pen in his hand and was about to sign the document, his wife came by and yelled, "Don't sign that. You have to read it first." So what was your thoughts when you saw that in the documentary, Beyond Human Nature?
Well, I knew that they talk about that in the book too, the same story. So clearly that's an important point. I think it really gives an idea of how Winkler operated. He kind of will show up unannounced, say that somebody didn't sign something and kind of give the impression that this needs to be done quickly. He's got a lot of things to do. And I think this kind of goes back to something I talked about in the past where he took advantage of how nice people are in this area of Wisconsin and how they trust police. He really took advantage of that.
Yeah, another thing that was brought up in the documentary was that there was at least one person that was doing a lie detector, and just as he was, we had the machines hooked up, Winkler started to like pound on the glass behind him to sort of get his blood pressure to spike to make it seem that he was lying. Do you remember that part?
I don't remember that part.
Yeah, like he started pounding on the police glass behind the guy, to throw him off. So yeah, he was had every trick, every sort of little dirty thing he could think of. I'm sure he thought he was being very, very clever by doing that.
Well, and I'll add too that Winkler is from Wisconsin too, so he knows Wisconsinites. And I think he really just used that to his advantage.
Yeah, I think so. As Stein read the document, he kept repeating to himself, "I didn't say that. I didn't say that." The whole document had been rewritten to incriminate Mike Pye. Stein eventually ripped up the document, I'm guessing in front of Winkler, and sent Winkler packing. "For once, my wife saved my ass," Steve said with a chuckle. "I would have lost my job and likely went to prison if I had signed that and then tried to say it wasn't true." So right now I want to play a clip from the trial of Kellner, Brian Kellner, actually his testimony at the trial, because more or less for the rest of this episode, we're going to be trying to walk back what he says in this snippet here. So let's take a listen right now.
Prosecutors say this is their strongest witness, Brian Kellner.
I think that they'll find the case is really, frankly, not that complex. It's a simple matter of whether they accept what Brian Kellner told them or not.
Everybody except Ray went out the front door of the coupe and down towards number 7 paper machine where Tom was. Ray went out the back door, number 9's booth. and that they confronted Tom by the bubbler.
Kellner places all 6 suspects at the murder scene, talks specifically about Ray Moore screaming at Monfils and Mike Hearn shoving him in the chest.
Ray Moore standing behind him, and Mike Hearn go up in front of him, and they were shaking that tape in his face saying, "We got you now, there's no way you can deny this."
According to Kellner, Dale Bastian, Michael Piazakowski, Michael Johnson, and Kutzka were also in that control room. Kellner says Kutzka told him what happened next.
This was going on, that Mike Hearn was right up in Tom's face and gave him a shove. And sometime during that time period there, whatever, how long it took, that one of the guys gave him a slap upside the back of the head. He said he was hit in the head, yeah. Yes, sir.
And did Mr. Kutzka say where he was hit in the head?
Top back.
If Kellner is believed, then everybody else is lying. They're lying to cover up their crime. If one fall, they should all fall.
So Kellner is really, really specific in that audio track. I get the sense that those words are what convicted the Monfils 6. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. I think his statement, his testimony was definitely what got him convicted. With the Fox Den thing, and then the bubbler confrontation. So yeah, I think that was a key piece.
So you heard the tape now, and now we're going to try to explain why he said those things, and maybe what he was fearing at the time. So bewildered but trusting Kellner had signed the statement, Kellner told these authors that he tried to correct his record on numerous occasions, but no one was paying attention, not even the DA, Zakowski. In October of 1996, so a year after the trial, and away from Randy Winkler, Kellner wrote the following notarized deposition for the Court of Appeals. At the time, Randy Winkler took my statement on November 30th, 1994. I had been interrogated for 8 hours. During this time, Winkler threatened me with the loss of my job, the loss of my children, and being put in jail. He told me that I was lying and that I could be treated as a hostile witness and subjected to long and unpleasant time to having to go through a John Doe hearing. In addition, Winkler told me that my ex-wife, who is at the time was my living companion, was having an affair with Keith Kutzka. Winkler said that they had proof of this affair, and all of this would be coming up during the trial. So obviously, this would be one reason why he would have said those things at the trial. Now, you mentioned when you listened to the tape, Mike, that you thought maybe he had a piece of paper in front of him that he was reading from.
Yeah, I was wondering if he did, only because the only thing about this story that I have a little trouble with is if he is saying that all this was made up, like the bubbler confrontation and all that, and this was all made up by Winkler, it just sounds like he is speaking from his own mind in the testimony. So I was thinking either he was reading off something, or the only other option, I guess, would be that he went over all this multiple times, either on his own or possibly with the DA or the ADA, to prepare for the testimony. Because it sounds like he's speaking very extemporaneously and from his own mind. Because generally, if he's saying that it's a lie, which he does say that this is a lie in his notarized statement, you kind of have to remember the lie. And he sounds like he's speaking pretty much from his own memory.
What's remembered lives.
Losing someone precious from our lives is the most painful event that one can endure. Seasons of Life Memorials is dedicated to making sure the person you lost is never forgotten. We work with you to help you craft a film about your loved one's life that can be viewed at the gravesite. We can also help you create a film about your very own life that can be viewed in the obituary section of your hometown newspaper. Imagine that, your friends, relatives, and neighbors viewing your own unique story and how your life truly did matter. Visit our website, seasonsoflifememorials.com, and follow us on social media today to start viewing what we can do for you.
And I mean, it was compelling. Like I said, I think that testimony is definitely what got the Monfils 6 convicted for sure. Kellner said that Keith Kutzka had been talking about various theories that had been just generally floating around the mill for a long time. But Winkler refused to change the statement. He refused to admit that Kutzka had only talked about various theories. And then Kellner went on to say, I signed it because I was afraid of Winkler's threats and because I wanted to get it over with, to go home to digest what had happened and why. What do you think about that sentence?
Yeah, I think he, like many people in this case that were interviewed, they just wanted this to be over. They wanted to just get out of there. So I think that's probably pretty accurate.
About a week before the Monfils murder trial, Kellner was brought into Winkler's office. At this point, Winkler told Kellner that if he tried to change his statement in any way, that he would be looking at the loss of his job, jail time for perjury, and being declared a hostile witness. So again, a week before the trial. So what you heard on the audio clip that we played earlier, so this is what is going through his mind while he's being asked these questions by D.A. Zakowski. If I stray away from this testimony, I'm going to lose my job. I'll probably go to jail myself. And those are not things anyone wants to be up against. So I can kind of understand why he did it. I've never been in that situation, so it's hard. What do you think, Mike? Do you think you would have gone through with basically what Kellner did, or would you have had a change of heart and just say, I can't do this?
Well, I think I probably would have taken the approach that some of these other workers had, like Melville, that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, and there was another worker, Hendricks, where they are a little bit more upfront with that they're telling the truth and that, you know, they're not lying and they are cooperating. With Kellner, I think ultimately it kind of just shows you that everybody is first and foremost going to take care of themselves. I mean, obviously he wanted to do the right thing. He believed that he was doing the right thing, telling the truth. But when he's faced with these threats, I mean, it was very real because it was happening that they were going to lose their jobs if they were viewed as uncooperative. So it's one thing to have Winkler telling him that he's not telling the truth, but it's another thing when you know that you kind of have your own employer against you. They're not on your side. And so I can see why he did it. I don't think I would have been so quick to fall into this. But again, I mean, he had a family. He was going through a rough time in his life with the separation. So I can understand why he did it.
So Winkler was he brought Kellner into the DA office with Zukowski and assistant Bill Greisbach. And Zukowski basically said, Kellner told Zukowski that there are many parts in the statement that Kutzka just basically put in himself, and that Kellner Kutzka had never said any of this. And I was told during the trial that these discrepancies would be brought up and clarified. However, I was never given the opportunity to clarify the record at the trial. So this is kind of what gets me with Zukowski, that Zukowski would assure Kellner that these discrepancies would be brought up and would be clarified. And it kind of, it goes back to the Milwaukee Film Fest, and who were the two that were there. It was Zukowski and Winkler. And it's kind of like all these years later, they're still kind of watching each other's back, Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the thing that I took from that comment was, Zukowski, it wasn't necessarily that he was going to be the one to give him the opportunity to address these discrepancies. This should have been done by the defense, because, if Kellner's testifying, doesn't that mean that he gets to be cross-examined? Because if you testify for one side, you have to testify, or at least the other side has the opportunity to cross-examine. So why wasn't this brought up in cross-examination? That would have been the perfect opportunity for the defense to talk to him about this.
True.
But what were you going to say before?
Oh, just that, Zukowski and Winkler were sort of like two peas in a pod, and that they're both sort of willing to sort of bend the truth in various ways to get the outcome that they wanted. And then all these years later, they show up at the screening of the film, and they're still sort of watching each other's back. When Winkler states that the blade would have pushed Monfils away from him, and then Zukowski says nothing, at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So two peas in a pod, those two. So then Kellner goes on to say, I'm making this statement now because it is important for me for the truth to be told. I'm not being harassed or threatened by anyone to do this, unlike when Winkler wrote a statement for me. It has been a long time, but now this truth must come out. And of course, it was signed in front of a notary public. So, why do you think that this statement to the Court of Appeals didn't have much of an effect as far as getting the rest, the other five besides Mike Pye, released?
I don't know. I really have no clue how that would have worked. Are you saying that because this helped out Mike Pieckowski's release?
I would imagine in some way.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if this letter actually did help with that, because to me, I get the impression that Mike was released just because he was lucky to find a judge that saw through all this. I don't know if the letter was any part of it, but I think my impression is that this letter was largely ignored because it was done. Once Kellner signed that statement, that was it. They got what they needed from him, and they were done with him.
Yeah, very true. So the authors go on to state that when people are interviewed by the police in the city of Green Bay, they do not write their own statement. The investigator writes it using a combination of their thoughts and the investigator's thoughts. When finished, the interviewee reads it and verifies if it is correct, and then signs it in front of the investigator. The authors point out an unscrupulous investigator can tilt the words to his benefit. They can also control the atmosphere in the room to keep the interviewee in a stressful or comfortable situation. Also, the interviewee often hurries through the sheet while reading it, looking for corrections. So now we talked briefly before we started earlier tonight, and I stated that I was in a situation once where I witnessed a drunk driver hit a car and then flee the scene. I was with a friend, and this was senior year of high school, and then the police officer came over to my mom's house, and he just wrote down what we told him. He didn't try to interject anything of his own. He just wrote down what we saw and then left. So it might not be the case that this practice where the investigator sort of writes up the statement might just be in the city of Green Bay. And Mike, you stated that you weren't sure what happened outside of the city of Green Bay.
You mean the procedures?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no clue. And we don't know. Green Bay may not even do it that way anymore. That might be outdated.
The authors go on to say that detectives are taught it is okay to lie when used ethically. But when a lie is used to extract false statements, that is plain wrong. So that's what they basically say Winkler was doing. He was using lies to extract false statements. So detail sheets are detectives' written report of an interview. They can contain hearsay and subjective opinion and the subjective opinions of the detective. So the police officer who came over to interview myself after I witnessing the drunk driver basically was filling out a detail sheet, and but he wasn't interjecting any of his own thoughts at the time. So maybe this was only something that was being done within the city of Green Bay. But obviously it had a big role in sort of this case, in that you could get someone like Winkler and he's, writing out these detail sheets of what happened. And then you get an idea of how this fiasco came about, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the two scenarios are a little bit different. I mean, with the Monfils case, there was a real push to get that solved. And with your story, I mean, they kind of knew who they were going to go after, and it wasn't like this high profile case. So the urgency wasn't there, for them to interject their own points. But I get your point anyway, though, with just that it is that was the process that you saw.
Memento mori, remember you must die someday. However, your life can be remembered forever by contacting us at seasonsoflifememorials.com. We are here to teach you how to create a film about your life that can be seen at your future gravesite as well as within the obituary section of your very own newspaper. Contact us today at seasonsoflifememorials.com. Mike, we were talking about earlier about taking vacations, and oftentimes when you get back from a vacation, you might create a scrapbook. Can you compare that to the videos that we produce here at Seasons of Life?
Yeah, we know that for decades now, when people go on vacations, they'd usually make like a family photo album of the trip. Certainly nowadays, people post on social media their vacations. And I mean, to an extent now, with social media, Instagram and Facebook and things like that, people do kind of do like a scrapbook of their life to some extent. And our point is that there is a correlation between doing like a trip scrapbook and then doing one of these videos, which is largely, it's kind of like just a larger version of a scrapbook, but really for your entire life, not just a vacation. And it seems like the ideal thing to do to kind of showcase the high points of somebody's life, just like you would with a scrapbook for a vacation. You want to remember the great times that you had, and the people that were in your lives, and the things that you accomplished, places you went to, family that you created, and all those family memories. So it's just kind of a similarity to that, where this service, Seasons of Life Memorials, is really just like a way to remember your life, much like a scrapbook would, but again, in a more detailed video form that, unlike a scrapbook, really can last forever.
And we're back. The authors discovered that Winkler had doctored detail sheets within the case. He wanted to make the outcome fit the police theory. So about 4 months into the Monfils investigation, the authors speculate Winkler began using detail sheets that were not standard issued by the Green Bay Police Department. And they provide examples of this within the index of the book, where they show specifically what Winkler did. He was actually sort of making his own detail sheets and trying to make them look like that they were standard issue Green Bay Police Department detail sheets. Why do you think he did that, Mike?
You know, I was just thinking about that. It's evident that he was kind of doctoring them later on and then backdating them to kind of fit the way the investigation ended up going. But I was just thinking, why couldn't he have just used the format 1, as they put it, which was the actual police form? Why do you think he couldn't just use those? I mean, he could have backdated those too, couldn't he?
That's a good question. And I don't have a clear answer to that. I can't say that I don't want to speculate on such a crucial detail.
Right.
So in January of 1994, Winkler was the only detective on the case. And this is when, again, the authors speculate that he began to doctor the detail sheets from the early days of the investigation. So the first few days that this case started, November 21st, 1992, Winkler went back and he added things to the detail sheets to make it fit the police theory, basically. At trial, Winkler was forced to admit that he had doctored detailed sheets that had been 2 years old. And I speculate myself, again, this might be one of the main reasons why he was fired from the Green Bay Police Department. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's possible. It could also be that I think, well, maybe that was after. I'm trying to remember the timeline of some of that stuff after the case wrapped up. But yeah, I think that could definitely be a good reason for that. I also wanted to add, too, that I guess Winkler didn't really use a computer for these things, because in the book they say Format 2 is the computerized Green Bay Police Department form, and they say he never used that. So I guess he either handwritten or handwrote these things, like had the form typed out and then filled it in by hand, or he used a typewriter. I just think that's kind of interesting. I guess he didn't like using the computer forms.
Yeah. Having seen him like face to face, within about 18 inches, he didn't. He doesn't strike me as someone who's very computer literate. On December 8th, 1994, Winkler interviewed millworker Jim Melville, a friend of Keith's, and he claimed to have a tape of Kutzka's confession. Melville explained that Kutzka had thought Monfils had committed suicide before reading the autopsy. So before he read the autopsy, Kutzka just thought, yeah, it was suicide. But then after reading it, he thought that the death blow to the back of the head was not caused by the agitator blade. So having not read the actual autopsy, I'm not sure how he came to that conclusion, especially since the agitator blade had the same dimensions, 3/8 inch, that was found on the back of Monfils' head. What do you think? Why do you think that Keith would have thought that it was not the blade?
Well, I think the only reason he must have decided that it wasn't the blade is just because of the fact that it was ruled a homicide. It wasn't an accidental death, it wasn't ruled that way. So I think he just figured, he took the coroner's word for it, and he figured if they're saying it wasn't accidental or wasn't suicide, then I guess he must have thought that they considered that the blade wasn't what killed him. So I guess he just kind of thought, if they're ruling it a homicide, then somebody must have hit him in the head.
Yeah, so Kutzka believed that someone must have thumped Monfils in the back of the head. Winkler's detail sheet with Melville was dated December 14th, 1994. That was almost a full week after the interview actually took place. So again, he's changing the dates on these detail sheets, which seems odd to me as well. Now, every mill worker interviewed was threatened with the loss of their job if they didn't cooperate. Of the 100 interviews over a 2.5-year period, not one person ever confirmed that the bubbler scenario ever took place. Now, given the job loss threat, you would figure that at least one mill worker would have confirmed that bubbler scenario. If nothing else, just to protect their high-paying job. But they didn't. So that sort of strikes me as, doesn't that strike you as sort of bizarre that they did 100 interviews, no one stated that, and yet they still went to trial with this theory of the bubbler thing?
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot that even though these people, these employees were they weren't affirming the bubbler story, but they were cooperating, and I think that says everything, that these investigators and the DA were really grasping at straws, for a conviction.
So a man named Al Keeley, he was a mill worker. He was so disturbed by the police tactics that he produced a document condemning them, and this is within the book. The document is written in very simple words. It's how my description, because these mill workers more or less are sort of salt of the earth type guys, and he describes how Winkler accused him, Keeley, of being an alcoholic, after having smelled some like peppermint candy on his breath. Keeley's boss, Bob Thutt, went to Keeley and said that he would be fired for drinking on the job. But then Keeley said, well, did the person smell beer or liquor on my breath? And the response was, they smelled liquor. And Keeley came back and said, well, I gave up drinking liquor. I only drink beer, so I couldn't have been me. And apparently that logic was enough for him to keep his job. Keeley also complained about Frank Pinto. This was a detective that the James River Mill, had hired privately to do an investigation as well. And basically what they were saying was that, again, they were all being threatened with their job loss. But then in addition to that, a lot of them were threatened with having to go to what's described as a month-long trial, which I would assume was the John Doe. But the big takeaway was all of the workers who faced this month-long trial, they would all go a month without pay, and they were all very afraid of that. What did you think of that, Mike?
About the John Doe threat?
About the threat of a month without pay.
Yeah, I think that's a real issue that most people wouldn't be able to handle. They wouldn't be able to work without a month of pay. And there's a part 2 where in the letter where he says the mill management states that they would possibly reimburse them, or they would pay them for the testimony time if they essentially gave testimony that would favor the prosecution. And again, they were really putting their employees in a rough spot here. And to me, the mill is kind of, in many ways, just as bad as Winkler with how they're coercing people into getting a conviction.
New episodes of the Monfils 6 podcast drop every other Friday. Please join us again. Thanks for listening.
Have you recently lost a loved one and want to hold on to their memory forever? Would you like all of the world to view what their life had been about? Seasons of Life Memorials is what you are looking for. We create individual and unique documentary shorts that will allow anyone visiting the gravesite to view the documentary and your memories of the loved one. Contact us today to set up an appointment at seasonsoflifememorials.com.